We're live. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Democratic Mayoral and West Side Board of Reps Forum. We're excited to share this evening with you. We want to invite you now to share this post so that persons in our community can take part in this forum tonight. We're delighted to have, again, our co-host. My name again is Reverend Robert Jackson Jr., pastor Bethel ME Church here in the city of Stanford, along with my co-moderator here,
Reverend Dr. Joseph Ford. And we are a part of the Concerned Clergy here in Stamford, Connecticut. We're just delighted to have with us as our guest Mayor David Martin and State Representative Carolyn Simmons. We will now turn it over to Mayor Martin so that he can give his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much to the Concerned Clergy and to you, Reverend Ford, and you, Reverend Jackson, for hosting this forum. And I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit about my background and then move on from there. I got 2 degrees from MIT, one in economics and one in biology. After that graduation, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked at the Congressional Budget Office in the National Defense and International Affairs Division, mostly working on force structure, manpower, projections, and strategic weapons analysis. And the most important thing is that I saw what good policy analysis really was from a first-rate organization. I went on to Stanford Business School, where I graduated in the top 10% of the class with a focus on public management. After that, I moved back to the East Coast and went to Philadelphia, where I worked for Conrail, working on a precedent-setting labor agreement, and where I met my future bride, Judy. About 40 years ago, we moved to Stamford, Connecticut. We chose this community because we liked the diversity and we liked what it had to offer. She worked at Pitney Bowes, and then she became a school teacher at Northeast School, and together we co-founded the Starfish Connection, a mentoring program for children starting in 3rd grade and helping them get all the way to college for kids on reduced free lunch. That program continues today in its 14th year. We currently have 50 kids in that program and several who have already graduated from college. In the meantime, I worked in large organizations like PepsiCo and had much experience in management and in capital optimization. And I became eventually the senior partner of a small business where we were giving strategic advice to major corporations. Meanwhile, I served as a volunteer elected official on the Board of Representatives for 26 years, 8 of which I was president, and 2 years on the Board of Finance, and many volunteer boards, nonprofit volunteer boards in the city before becoming mayor almost 8 years ago. And I guess I'd sum it up with something a little bit different. I am not your usual politician, and I don't make a lot of wishful promises. I'm a policy geek. I do policy. I do the math. And if it's possible to get something done and we can figure out how to afford it, then that is what I do. I'm very proud of my service and my background, but I really didn't come here to talk so much about that because what my promises are, what my background is far less important than what we actually do. And in that area, I am extremely proud. Stamford is the star of the state, and everyone in the state recognizes a large community. We're the best. Clearly the most successful large diverse city, in fact, in all of New England. But I believe that we should be doing more. And in fact, that is my vision, to make us a shining example of what a diverse city can be. A place where people want to live because the parks are good, the roads are better, and the schools are just plain great. My vision includes just about everything you would want in a quality of life, but the important part is that in a diverse community, people can live together, work together, and make it even better. But you can't be a shining example if you were, in fact, just about ready to go bankrupt, which is where I was when I started. And that's where we were headed. There had been lots of political promises and some good progress. But fundamentally, we were building this community on sand rather than building it on a solid foundation.
Mayor,
and that, my time, I think, is a little bit long, and so I will continue with more points later. Thank you very much for your time.
We also have State Representative Carolyn Simmons. She will come now with her opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Stanford Concerned Clergy, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Ford, for hosting this, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. It's great to have you engaged in this forum tonight, and thank you for your participation. My name is Caroline Simmons, and I've been honored to serve as Stanford State Representative for the past 7 years, serving as co-chair of the state's Commerce Committee, as well as a member of the Higher Education and Human Services Committees, and before that, the Public Safety Committee. I also currently work at Yale University at a maternal mental health lab that works on mental health policies for low-income families to help families get the resources needed to thrive. Prior to this, I was honored to work at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. for 4.5 years on domestic and international counterterrorism programs, working to protect cities across the country from a range of threats. And now I'm so honored to be running to be your mayor, and I wanted to share more about why I'm running, my vision for the city, and then really looking forward to the questions and discussion tonight and to hearing feedback from everyone. We're at an opportune moment right now in Stamford, and I'm so optimistic about all the potential and possibility that lies ahead for our city. But we can't go back to the same old way of thinking. We have to come up with new ideas. We have to bring a bold vision to take our city to the next level. And there's so much progress we've made, but so much we can be doing better. And we have to make sure as we come out of this pandemic that we're not leaving those who are hit hardest behind, and that we're building a more inclusive, affordable, equitable, vibrant city where every resident has the opportunity to pursue their dreams and thrive. As mayor, my top 5 priorities are to fix our infrastructure, including our roads, bridges, and school facilities, and to build more sidewalks to make our city more connected. Second, to invest in education and make sure every student has access to a world-class education. This includes making up for lost time in the classroom during the pandemic, providing more mental health resources to our students and teachers, and fixing our aging school facilities and getting the funding we need, using my relationships in Hartford to leverage support for our city and be an advocate for our city and our schools. Third, advancing economic prosperity. We are facing income inequities across our city and an 8% unemployment rate. That's over 4,000 people in Stamford who are out of work. As co-chair of the Commerce Committee, I know how important it is to get job training programs and workforce development initiatives on the ground for local residents and to connect our unemployed to job opportunities. I'm also a strong champion for small businesses and have fought for more funding at the state level to support women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses to make sure they get the access to capital they need to thrive and create jobs in our local economy. As mayor, I'll continue to be a champion for small businesses and especially help those small businesses who've been struggling amidst this pandemic to survive. Fourth, I want to make our city more affordable. So many people are getting priced out and struggle to afford to live here. Whether you're a recent college graduate who can't afford your own apartment, a working family working multiple jobs and still struggling to afford a mortgage or let alone a down payment on a first home, or a senior retired struggling to live on a fixed income with property taxes continuously rising. I want to make our city a more affordable place so that no one gets priced out and everyone can afford to live here. And finally, I want to improve quality of life for residents and make our government more responsive to constituent concerns. We have an obligation as government officials to provide good governance and the best services possible. And I want to make our city the most responsive government in the country so that every constituent gets their concern answered and addressed, whether it's when your leaves are getting picked up or when your pothole is getting fixed. I want to be the most responsive mayor possible to help citizens get the services they deserve. Thank you again for being here tonight, and I'd be honored to earn your vote on September 14th and looking forward to the questions and discussion.
All right, thank you both, Mayor Martin and State Representative Caroline Simmons, for your introductory statements. As we proceed in this forum, we want to pose to each of you 12 questions, and you will have a total of 2 minutes to answer those questions. Again, we will set our alarm, and once the alarm goes off, we will then proceed to the next candidate. So we'll begin with First of all, Dr. Ford will share in the first question to Mayor Martin.
Yes, Mayor Martin. Is there a plan to address the issue of affordable housing?
So it is not well recognized, but in fact, Stamford does more already for affordable housing than all the communities that surround it put together. And during the term, one of the things that we have just done is we created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It is the first time such an organization, which is designed to get more funds to affordable housing, has been done in the entire state. Meanwhile, we've built more below market rate units in the last 8 years than any other city in the state. And then we have also had things like 215 Park and the projects that was done in conjunction with Inspirica that provides deeply affordable housing. So we have a gamut of programs. It is true, this is an expensive part of the country, this is an expensive part of the world, and we are doing our best to try to make certain that there's affordable housing for those who need it the most.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. State Representative Carolyn Simmons, same question.
Thank you for the question. This is a critical concern facing our city. We have an affordability crisis. So many residents are struggling to afford to live here. 30% of our residents are rent constrained, and we're short about 5,000 affordable housing units in Stamford. And especially amidst this pandemic, when so many are struggling just to be able to afford basic necessities like food and diapers and transportation, we need to do everything we can to reduce the cost of the housing burden on families. And this will be one of my top priorities as mayor. Specifically, I want to launch 5 initiatives. First, increasing the supply of affordable housing, bringing more affordable housing developers to our city, and taking advantage of city-owned land to provide subsidies for residents. Also looking at innovative affordable housing options where we can provide on-site daycare and job training programs and entrepreneurial opportunities for our local residents at housing complexes in our city. Second, I want to create a workforce housing fund. So much of our workforce can't even afford to live here and commute from other towns in Connecticut. I want to make sure that everyone who works and gives back to our city can afford to live here, and there's many other cities that have launched workforce housing funds and initiatives, and that's something I want to launch in Stamford as well. Third, holding developers accountable to provide more affordable housing. Yes, right now there's a 10% requirement for the below market rate, but even the below market rate is not affordable. So I want to make sure we're holding our developers accountable. A lot of them are paying the fee in lieu of payment. I want to make sure that that is actually going to affordable housing, and I think we could even look at increasing that 10% requirement. I also want to make sure when new housing and development is going up that jobs are trickling down to local residents. There's so many out-of-state plates we see at our construction sites, and I want to launch a Mayor's Construction Academy to provide job training and skills for our local workforce so that they can get those construction jobs. Fourth, I want to increase pathways to home ownership. There's many down payment assistance programs and grants across the country that we could look at. The city of Miami provides a first-time home buyers program, and I want to launch innovative initiatives like this so everyone can afford housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, our second question, thank you so much for the answers in timely fashion. Our second question, we'll direct this first to State Representative Caroline Simmons. How do you speak to the issue of socioeconomic divide in Stanford? Your 2 minutes begins now.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
How do you speak to the issue of socioeconomic divide in Stanford?
Yes, the social and economic divide in Stamford. This is another critical issue that already existed in our city, the gap between the haves and have-nots. Right now, 43% of residents are living paycheck to paycheck, and the pandemic has only exacerbated that. We're facing a looming eviction crisis. So many people are unemployed and struggling to make ends meet. And so one of my top priorities, going back to affordable housing, is increasing the supply of affordable housing, making Stamford a more affordable place to live, whether you're a renter, providing more subsidies and support. On the home ownership side, trying to provide more property tax relief by making our city government more efficient and reducing the property tax burden on our local residents. Second, we need to look at helping ensure families can afford basic necessities like food, transportation, childcare. All of these things are so out of reach for so many families. We're facing a childcare crisis. Even prior to the pandemic, there's childcare deserts in Stanford, places where people cannot afford childcare. And as we just saw in the pandemic, so many women had to drop out of the workforce to be able to afford to take care of their kids. So I want to launch an affordable childcare program in our city to help families meet basic needs. And then third, I want to take a neighborhood by neighborhood approach and make sure that not just certain neighborhoods are getting attention, and not just wealthy neighborhoods are getting access to things like vaccinations and social supports. I want to make sure every neighborhood in Stamford is heard and getting supported by my mayor's office. And I will make sure to lead monthly neighborhood walks. I will conduct regular surveys to residents. I will do everything I can to provide more resources to help those who are struggling and hurting right now and those who are most vulnerable in our community.
Thank you very much.
Same question that we posed to State Representative Caroline Simmons. Mayor Martin, this is for you as well. How do you speak to the issue of social economic divide in Stanford?
Well, the first part is that the government itself has to recognize that everyone in this community gets services that they deserve and that they need. And I put that in this context. I talked before is that when I started, we were headed on to bankruptcy. We hadn't been investing in infrastructure, and we had been making promises and basically building our city on sand rather than a solid foundation. Let me be more specific. We had not invested in roads in Stamford. We went out and did an objective assessment of the roads, and guess where the roads were the worst? They were the worst in the west side, and there hadn't been any major roads paved in the west side for years. And so we went around and we objectively assessed it, and we went back and we started with the west side first, and we've been paving Richmond Hill and West Main Street. We got the state to do that, Stillwater Avenue, Smith Street, West Broad Street, Liberty, Fairfield Avenue, Spruce, Alden, Stephen, and more. Oh, and incidentally, we had to hold up that paving for a year because when there was a fire on the west side, we discovered that there wasn't water pressure to fight a fire. And there hadn't been for a long time, and nobody had been paying any attention to it. And so we had to hold up the road paving to get Aquarian to come back and create the water pressure that we needed so that we could fight the fires. The Yearwood Center was bankrupt. Hundreds of thousands of dollars and shortly closed. And we turned that around with new management. We had, before the pandemic, we had 800 plus children there. We had 4 different African American churches using it for worship services. We had night basketball programs for young men that was founded by the city. And next year, we are already thinking about how do we get that pool that will actually serve that community there. And quite frankly, the thing that just blows my mind is that the city, before I became mayor, had been using a firefighter recruitment test that was biased against minorities. And we believe that they actually knew it was biased against minorities, and we threw that out.
Thank you.
Everybody
Mayor.
gets equal opportunity and equal services from the city, and that's the starting point.
Thank you, Mayor. This next question will go to Mayor Martin. We know that COVID has had a huge impact on small businesses. What will you do to make small businesses viable? Will you use any of the COVID money to support small businesses as well?
So the city of Stamford has actually done more to combat COVID than probably any other major city in the state. And I think that's well recognized. And the result of that, and a lot of focus, has been on how do we get vaccinations and masks and tests, particularly to communities on the east side and the west side that may not have the resources or the wherewithal to get to the traditional healthcare providers. And because of that, and when you do the statistical analysis, remember I'm the math geek, you will find that not only we've now hit 75% of the total population, about 85% of the eligible population for vaccinations, you will see that all of those areas along Tresser Boulevard on the east side and the west side are doing better than their counterparts in other parts of the state because of the emphasis that we made in creating those services and making them available. When it came to small businesses, which are mostly small personal services and restaurants, we did more faster to set up to help our small businesses, our restaurants, to stay through this pandemic. And we've had a few restaurants leave us, but in fact we've opened more restaurants during the pandemic than were closed. We have been working with a recent program for the haircutting, the get a shot, or I can't remember the little thing, the phrase, but basically working with barbershops and hair salons to try to support them during the pandemic. And post the pandemic, we were actually roaring back. We truly were successfully recovering from this pandemic. Of course, now we've been hit by the Delta, and people are pulling back again. But basically, we're putting the resources there to make certain that these businesses can succeed. I would also mention that we actually went with training programs for our youth to help small businesses and particularly the youth get job training. And unfortunately, one of the realities in the city is you've got to go to the Board of Finance and you've got to go to the Board of Representatives. And unfortunately, they cut that back. But we're going back again next year because those are programs we need.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. State Representative Simmons, same question. The COVID has ravaged small businesses and they're struggling. What will you do to make small businesses viable? And will you use any COVID money to support small businesses?
Yes, COVID has been devastating for small businesses across our state and in Stamford. And as Commerce Co-Chair, this has been one of my top priorities over my time in the legislature, trying to get more support for our businesses. I helped secure loans and grants for over 72 Stanford small businesses and have been a champion for getting away from the big corporate tax cuts that used to be given out to the bigger corporations, and instead focusing on our small businesses, who are the backbone of our local economy, who create 2/3 of all new jobs, and who hire locally. So as mayor, my top 3 priorities will be first to create a COVID small business recovery fund to help small businesses get access to capital and specifically grants, by working with the state and the U.S. Small Business Administration to help businesses that are already struggling, that have taken on so much debt, to get through this difficult period, because our businesses were forced to shut down at no fault of their own to protect public health and safety. And we need to do everything we can to help them. Second, I want to work to provide more access to capital and entrepreneurial opportunities for women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. We know that only 4% of commercial lending goes to women and minority-owned businesses because of barriers that were on the books for so many years, preventing access to capital to these groups. So I want to do everything we can to get more access to capital to women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses and help them get greater access to government contracts and to create a more inclusive economy. And then thirdly, we know that rent is a struggle for small business owners, and I want to create more opportunities for entrepreneurship and startups to be able to afford rent at city-owned buildings. We currently have a 30% commercial vacancy rate, and those buildings are just sitting there with empty space, and there's entrepreneurs that can't afford space right now to start up. So I want to launch a Startup Stanford initiative that will not only create a fast-track process for new entrepreneurs and small businesses to start up, but also provide access to vacant space that's just sitting there right now so that they have an opportunity to flourish and provide services and jobs for our community.
Thank you.
All right. The next question that we want to pose, again, this will be to State Representative Caroline Simmons. Do you have a plan to enhance minority and women business participation with city funding?
Yes, this is something I would absolutely prioritize as mayor. Right now, only about 5% of all city contracts go to women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. And unfortunately, they lack access to capital and are excluded from the system in so many ways. And so I believe government has a key role to play in providing more of an inclusive economy for these businesses. At the state level, I've worked on this. I've worked to increase the quotas and requirements for our state agencies to contract with women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. And this is something I would lead on at the city level as well. And mayors across the country are leading on this. And I want to make sure that every entrepreneur has an opportunity to contract with our city, and that we're providing a more inclusive contracting and permitting process for our women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses locally here in our community.
Thank you. Mayor Martin, we pose the same question to you. Do you have a plan to enhance minority and women business participation with city funding?
Absolutely. You know, it starts with the fact that although there's been much funding been made available from the federal government and from the state government, the bureaucracy to overcome those challenges has been enormous. And we've held multiple seminars and multiple assistance to small businesses to help them figure out how to get those loans, how to fill them out, how to get forgivable loans, etc. And some of the initial seminars that we had on Zoom had hundreds of small businesses here in Stamford. But that's only the beginning. You know, the other part of this is, do we have a true belief that everybody gets treated equally and gets equity, et cetera? And that starts with the fact that I am the first mayor that has both women and black and Latino on both the Fire Commission and the Police Commission. Rodney Bass was just appointed to the Police Commission. We also just appointed Silas Redd as an assistant chief, and he brings his experience in living in Stamford, but more importantly, understanding the various communities. We've increased hiring diversity in the police. But to the specific point, I've created a new position, and quite frankly, to give credit where credit's due, it is the concerned clergy that brought this to my attention. A good idea is a good idea, and we go figure out how to get it done. We have included, for the first time in this city, a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. That position is specifically not only to help make certain that we give hiring opportunities, because jobs come at first, hiring opportunities to everyone, regardless of their background. Excuse me, something's going off here. But also to ensure that those businesses, whether they be veterans or women's or minority-owned, have an opportunity and understand how they can succeed in the purchasing process of the city.
Thank you, Mayor. Next question is on our school systems, Mayor Martin. The Stanford school system has less than 10% minority population among its faculty. Do you have a plan to improve minority hiring at all levels in Stanford schools?
Well, I think, as most people appreciate, but not everyone knows, I'm not in charge of the hiring within the school system. Having said that, we now have a superintendent who is a minority. I don't view her that way. I was one who made certain that she stayed in our school system when we hired a different person about 5 or 6 years ago. And I worked very hard to make certain, even though the Board of Education hired someone else, that we could keep Superintendent Temu Lucero and not lose her, as is often the case. And we were successful in that, and she has become the superintendent. Quite frankly, yes, I agree. We need to hire more minorities so that kids see more people as role models in their classroom when they go into the classroom. And so I'm fully in favor of that. I support that, and that is something that I will advocate on the Board of Education, even though I have no vote, but I still have a voice, and I will make that advocacy.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Representative Simmons, same question. The Stanford school system has less than 10% minority population among its faculty. Do you have a plan to improve minority hiring at all levels in Stanford Public Schools?
Yes, as mayor and as a non-voting member of the Board of Education, I would take a proactive role in trying to recruit more minority teachers to our schools. This issue is critical, as you highlighted. Over 90% of our teachers are white, yet over 60% of our students come from minorities, and we want to make sure that we have a student and we have a teacher population that represents our students. We know that students achieve better and do better when they're taught by a teacher that looks like them, and so this is a no-brainer and something we have much room for improvement on. As mayor, I would work with our Board of Education to engage alumni of Stanford Public Schools to try to get students who graduate from our schools to come back and teach. And that also goes to the point of the need for more affordable housing so we can recruit a diverse and strong workforce that can afford to live here. Second, I would work with colleges and try to start recruiting early at colleges to try to encourage graduates to come teach in our community and be a chief advocate for our city and all the great reasons that they should come teach in our school system. And then third, I would work with community leaders. I would work with our faith leaders. I think this requires a community approach to really work to recruit teachers to our city. We have an incredible public school system, an incredible student body, and it's a wonderful place to teach, and I would work to lead that recruitment effort. And part of this too is giving our teachers and students school buildings that they deserve and that do justice to the incredible education that they're getting. Right now, mold has been found in 11 of our school buildings. Many of our school buildings are falling apart, and teachers fear for their health when they step into their buildings. That's unacceptable. We have to fix our buildings so we can recruit a diverse, talented workforce to our schools.
Thank you very much.
All right. State Representative Caroline Simmons, this question's for you. Stanford transports many of its elementary and middle school students outside of the resident communities. What will you do to lead new building efforts in local communities to stop or minimize busing our students away from their communities?
This is an important issue because right now there's students that are spending 45 minutes to even an hour on the bus in the morning and at night just to get to school. And that's time that's not spent sleeping, that's not spent with their families, and that's not spent learning in the classroom. And so we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure our school system is efficient and that students have access to a quality education right in their neighborhood. So as mayor, I would work with the Board of Education and the superintendent to explore things like opening up new schools, a new school in the South End, a new school in the West Side, making sure all of our communities have access to quality schools in their neighborhood so that we can reduce the time that students spend on buses to other communities, wasting that time that they could be learning. I also want to make sure we're supporting our special education population. We're pushing so many students out to other districts and spending so much money on transportation costs for our special education population. I want to make sure we're providing resources right here in our Stamford schools for individuals who have special education needs and providing the supports necessary here in Stamford.
All right, thank you. Mayor Martin, same question. Stanford transports many of its elementary and middle school students outside their resident communities. What will you do to lead new building efforts in local communities to stop or minimize busing our students away from their communities?
So a few years ago, after a very humid August, it was the West Hill staff and parents were saying, hey, we've got mold in our school, and the maintenance people that were in charge were saying, no, we got it, no, we got it. And I went to the superintendent, Earl Kim at the time, and said, this is so important that we have to basically have a joint task force between the city and the Board of Ed to examine the status of our schools. And what we uncovered was far more severe and far more than what we'd ever been told. That eventually resulted in the firing of the maintenance company and starting out on a completely new way of maintaining the buildings. And we started putting money to help correct these problems. And so far, we've put about $124 million, not just into new schools, which would be Strawberry Hill and the new North Street thing for the new North Street, which is just opening up, but just on capital improvements in the schools for a lot of different reasons. That's also given rise to an understanding that many of our schools are new enough and in good shape enough that we should make continued capital investments. But we shouldn't be making patches to existing schools where they are so old or in such bad shape that we just continually patch them, continually patching. We need to have complete renovation. So we are working on a bold new plan. That bold new plan is a facility plan that's been underway for some time. We expect that plan to come out in December. And there's two parts of that I want to hone in on. First of all, we have already got a plan for the complete renovation of West Hill High School. And we already have a plan to combine the Apples program, which is at Rippewam, by moving it down to Lockwood and combining it with CLC, will to some small degree begin to reduce some of that busing problem. But behind the scenes, I've already identified 2 possible new schools that would help relieve this problem. And we are going to build that into the plan that we're talking about so that we can reduce that and at the same time provide a diverse population in all of our schools.
Thank you. This next question is for Mayor Martin. The Stanford Advocate published an article on August 27th entitled, Report Dissects Dysfunctional Stanford School Board. Do you have a game plan to rid the Stanford Board of Education of the tension among the members as well as between or within professional staff in light of the recent Dave Pitney report? And what will you do as mayor and a non-voting member of the Board of Education to correct or try to improve the situation?
You know, when I began my second term, my remarks when I was inaugurated were about the growing discord in America that growing discord that was in Hartford, and that growing discord which had started to come into Stamford. And during the pandemic, the challenges that our school system and our city have faced have been almost insurmountable. And in those challenges, some people have risen, and particularly on the city side, there are so many people and so many organizations that I need to thank for having our city do such a good job in giving masks and testing and vaccinations. But on the school board, we've had some difficulties. And those difficulties were brought out in a report that was actually conducted not at my behest. It was done at the request of the superintendent of schools about some of the continual discord that was going on there. And that report was actually taken under the city's corporation counsel's office, that they subcontracted that. I am working to try to calm those anxieties, calm those statements. I will tell you it's very difficult. We live in a world, we live in a world where sometimes people are more interested in fighting. They have made up their minds before they see the facts, and they are busy throwing shade at one another. And quite frankly, there's been too much of that. And that isn't to say that no one is perfect, or that isn't to say that some people have been perfect and some people have not. But they've got to start working together, and I try to help them do that. And in executive session on several occasions, I've stepped in to try to help heal those wounds that they are continuing to shoot back and forth. And I will tell you, it's one of my biggest disappointments. The school children are so important, and the challenges that are being faced in the pandemic and continue to be faced right now, since the state won't allow us to go to remote learning this year, are
Thank you,
enormous.
Mayor Martin.
And we've got to solve that problem.
Thank you. State Representative Simmons, same question. The Stanford Advocate published an article on August 27th entitled "Report Dissects Dysfunctional Stanford School Board." Do you have a game plan to rid the Stanford Board of Education of the tension among the members, as well as between or with professional staff, in light of the recent Dave Pitney report? And what will you do as the mayor and non-voting member of the board to correct or try to improve the situation?
Yes, as a legislator, I know how important it is to have strong relationships between our legislative branch and our executive branch at the state level. And I've worked really hard to build relationships across the aisle. I have Republican co-sponsors on all bills that I pass, and I've worked across the aisle to get dozens and dozens of bills passed through the committee process. So I know how important the legislative process is, but how important it is to have those relationships with the executive branch. So first and foremost, I would bring that perspective as mayor of Stamford, and on day one, I would set up meetings and sit down one-on-one with all members of our boards. I would host, in the same way that I would host Mayor's Nights In, I would host Board Nights In and have our Board of Representatives, our Board of Finance, our Board of Ed members come into the mayor's office, and we would forge relationships and talk about ways we can advance progress for our city. Second, I would try to set a positive tone and put out a call for civility and working together among all of our board members. I've always believed that instead of attacking each other, let's attack the problems facing our community. I think having that positive leadership at the top and setting that accountability that we're going to work together for our students and for what's best for our city instead of attacking each other, would work hard to promote that message. And then thirdly, frankly, I've heard from a number of board members and even city employees that feel that they're not heard or that they're dismissed and that morale is low. And as mayor, I would take a proactive approach in working to build those relationships and to show members that they're respected, that they're heard, and to find common ground. Of course, we're not always going to get everything we want, but we have to compromise and work together. And I would show that respect to our board members and city employees so that there's a two-way relationship built out of trust to move forward the work of our city.
Thank you very much.
All right. Next question to State Representative Caroline Simmons. According to the U.S. Census, there has been a drastic decline in African American population in the last 10 years here in the city of Stamford. From your perspective, what are the contributing factors and how do you plan to address them?
Sure. So as you said, the census numbers came out, and now we are the second largest city. You know, we've grown by about 10,000 residents. But what's important to look at is, as you said, who are we leaving behind and who is getting priced out, who is not able to afford to live here anymore. And my top priority, one of my top priorities as mayor would be to advance affordable housing initiatives so that we can make sure all of our populations can afford to live here and that no one is getting priced out. Our African American community is a treasured part of our population in Stamford, and I hear so often that they don't feel that their voices are heard or that they have a seat at the table. I also think that there's rampant racial injustice across our city. If you look at the effects of COVID-19, the fact that Black people were contracting COVID and dying from COVID at twice the rate of white people, that is unacceptable, and that is injustice that we have to rectify and make sure that we're creating a more inclusive community where everyone has access to resources to be able to afford to live here, and that we're getting rid of those injustices by tackling the social determinants of health, things like housing, employment, access to food, to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to live here, and that's what I would focus on as mayor.
Thank you. All right. Mayor Martin, same question posed to you. According to the U.S. Census, there has been a drastic decline in the African American population in the last 10 years in Stamford, Connecticut. From your perspective, what are the contributing factors and how do you plan to address them?
Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that overall, the state of Connecticut has got an anemic sort of population growth. It is the worst in all of New England, and it is the fourth worst in the country. And given the financial status that exists within this state, that is a recipe for the same sort of situation that Stamford was going down when I became mayor, and that's the same situation that Hartford went down and became, in essence, bankrupt before the state legislature basically gave him debt relief to the tune of $500 million. But here in Stamford, people are coming here. And the challenge is, as you have well pointed out, and all of our talk about what we're trying to do for affordable housing, I would say it's two things. One, it is that we've lost some of the jobs over the decades that were served by our lower strata of income. It used to be that we had more locks built in Stamford than any place else in the world, but Yale left. We had more mailing machines built in Stamford and postage machines, but Pitney Bowes, although their headquarters is still, they no longer do manufacturing. And we had Clairol moved out. And the challenge is that those manufacturing entities which left our city over decades, and in fact left all of Lower Fairfield County and most of the state, are not coming back, at least to this expensive area. So we need more programs, and particularly intergenerational programs for the youth so that they have opportunities in the future. And that gets us back to what is our educational commitment? What is our educational program, and how well will the state actually support the people in this community that need more education funding? That comes back to when I try to get a job program passed and the Board of Finance says, no, we don't want to spend the money. That is one of the challenges. So we will continue to do that, but fundamentally, we need jobs for our residents that earn a living wage. And when you've lost all of that manufacturing, it's hard to restore that, but that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, this question is along the same lines. How would you improve diversity as it relates to minorities, including the LGBTQ population? And what will you do to work towards an inclusive local government employee profile?
Well, first of all, we've been hiring a more diverse profile than ever before in the city of Stamford. And on LGBTQ, the human rights organization, which does an annual survey of cities, we came from a very mediocre score to the highest score in the state of Connecticut. In fact, you could only get to 100%. We actually got some bonus points. So we have clearly established that we are going to be inclusive for those groups. We have funded programs, and I've actually spoken to Black artistic leaders about programs to add artistic cultural value to our community, and am willing to provide the funding in ways that recognize the heritage not just of national leaders but of local leaders as well. And within this city, as we talked about earlier, we've created this position specifically for the position of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. That is one of the key responsibilities of the position. I already have in my cabinet, I may not have mentioned this, we have more women in my cabinet than has ever been in the history of Stamford. One of the people in my cabinet was arrested for being at a sit-in because of civil rights in Delaware. One of my cabinet members actually helped defend the Black Panthers in New Haven. This is extremely important. I told you at the beginning, I want to make this the most successful diversity, a shining example of what can be done. You have got to accept the diversity and work to solve that problem. And again, we are the first to, in fact, have diversity training and anti-bias training, which I've taken myself and had a number of police officers and education people do. Nobody else ever did that before. This is absolutely a priority in terms of the nature of our community, and I will continue to push that agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to give some pushback on that before we move to State Representative Simmons. You mentioned about the diversity and equity officer that you have in place now, that you have in the budget for this coming year. But the profile is so general. It is very general. How will that officer be able to function and make sure that he's able to meet the needs of making sure that minorities are being hired? What power will he or she have behind them?
So there's a question about the job description for this position and the fact that the job description looks general. Fine. But I would tell you it's not the job description that empowers this position. It is what the mayor does. And when the Corporation Council comes to my office and says, hey, we have got to cancel this hiring of firefighters because the test is fundamentally discriminatory against minorities and it's going to cost us a couple of $100,000. And before she can complete her presentation, I've already picked up the phone and called the chairman of the Fire Commission and said, we can't proceed with this because of that. That's what empowers this. And it's the mayor's commitment to give the authority to be willing to do the things that could be extremely unpopular in order to achieve that end. And that's the commitment that I've made in the past, and that's the commitment I will make in the future.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. State Representative Simmons, same question. How would you improve diversity as it relates to minorities, including the LGBTQ population? And what will you do to work towards an inclusive local government employee profile?
First, it starts with building a diverse cabinet. As mayor, I would appoint leaders from diverse communities, making sure we're appointing more Black leaders, Latino leaders, LGBTQ leaders in my administration, as well as on boards and commissions. There's so many vacancies right now and so many talented local residents that could be filling those spots. So that's first and foremost. Second, I would make sure we're embedding racial equity into everything we do. So making sure all of our city departments and boards are focused on racial equity outcomes. And third, I think for so long as government officials, we give lip service to racial equity and we appoint a position here and there, but we have to start doing a better job of tracking results and measuring outcomes and looking at the educational inequities that exist in our school. Why are Black students suspended at 3.5 times the rate of white students? Why are literacy rates lower for Black students than whites? We need to do a better job of lifting up communities and improving on outcomes and holding high standards and benchmarks for better outcomes, not just giving lip service to racial equity, but actually achieving it. Again, looking at the numbers on COVID, it's unacceptable that Black people in our city died at twice the rate of white people. Let's look at the root causes that led to that and making sure we're getting rid of the racial inequities that exist in our healthcare system. As state rep, I sponsored legislation declaring racism a public health crisis and looking at all the effects that led to this pandemic, from housing insecurity, food insecurity, job insecurity. Why was our unemployment rate double for minorities as it was for white people? That is unfair, unjust, unacceptable, and we have to do better as a city, and we have to call out these injustices in order to be able to fix them.
Thank you, State Representative Simmons. I want to push back on you as well. The mayor has implemented for the new budget a diversity and equity officer. Is that something you will, if elected, you would support and you would move forward with?
Absolutely, I would support that, and I think it's critical that we get that person into that position as soon as possible. I would have done it on day one, and I want to make sure that we're getting all the tools and resources and staff support for that person. but also not just that we're appointing leaders in our city, but also that we're empowering people on the ground as well. So making sure we're focusing on people who are struggling right now, people who can't afford rent and can't afford food, and making sure that in addition to appointing people, that we're trickling down resources and supports for people on the ground in our communities.
Thank you very much.
State Representative Caroline Simmons, questions for you. How will you enhance the relationship with the state and federal government?
This is critical. As we said before, Stamford is the second largest city in Connecticut, and yet we're leaving funding on the table at the state level and at the federal level. As mayor, first and foremost, I would leverage the relationships that I've built from my 7 years in Hartford and 4 years in Washington, and do a better job of seeking out grants and bonding and funding for our city. As mayor, my job is to be the chief advocate for our city. And I'm not going to be hesitant about picking up the phone to call the governor, to call the Speaker of the House, to call our wonderful legislative delegation to get the support that we need. We have an opportune moment right now at the federal level with the historic infrastructure package that's coming down to states. There's going to be over $1.3 billion coming to our state, and we have to be ready as a city with a plan, with projects ready so we can seek out that funding. So first and foremost, leveraging relationships, making those phone calls and asking for the funding that we need. Secondly, I would make sure that we hire the best and brightest government relations team that can be applying for federal grants and state grants, because there's so much funding on the table right now, and we need to do a better job of being proactive at seeking out that funding. And then thirdly, I would invite leaders down to Stamford. I would invite our congressional delegation, our governor, our Speaker of the House down to Stamford to look at our schools and bring a sense of urgency to solving these problems, because Stamford is the economic engine of our state. We provide so much revenue, tax revenue, both to our state government, and Connecticut as a whole provides so much revenue to our federal government, and we need to do a better job of advocating to get more of that funding for our city.
Thank you. Mayor Martin, same question to you. How will you enhance the relationship with the state and federal government?
So first of all, we already have a relationship where I can call Congressman Himes or Senator Murphy or Senator Blumenthal, and in fact, we are working on programs right now for the federal government through Senator Himes or through Senator Murphy and Congressman Himes, as well as Senator Blumenthal, that are in fact to improve our schools, improve the quality of our affordable housing, and hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers, make a major step forward in our library system within the city of Stamford. So those are things that we're working on presently. The real challenge for Stamford, which is clearly the star of the state and is succeeding where most communities are not succeeding, and in fact to the point about the vaccinations, if you look at the census tracts that are on both sides of the Tresser Boulevard and analyze how we're doing compared to other communities across the state that have similar demographics, we're way ahead because of the programs that we've implemented to make certain that everyone, regardless of their color of their skin or any other criteria, that we would do everything we could, including doing canvassing, going door to door to get people, putting vaccination clinics, which many people have seen in Jackie Robinson Park and in Cove Park and in Hunt Park, and the programs that your own clergy have helped support. It's been phenomenal. But back to the real issue here is that the city of Stamford, under formulas that were adopted decades ago, gets very little support. We get about the same support for our schools that New Canaan gets on a per student basis. And if you think about it, our students, which have many, many challenges, and 58% are free or reduced lunch, and New Canaan has 0% free or reduced lunch. Our total funding that's supported from the state is about 6.1% of our total operating budget. That comes from a report from the state, not my calculations, and that is lower than every major city in Connecticut. It's lower than Norwalk. It's lower than New Canaan. It's lower than any other city in New England.
The next question, Mr. Mayor, we will start with you. What is your vision to make sure that Stamford remains the safest city in New England, and your perspective on community policing or the relationship with police and the fire department?
Thank you. We have taken major strides, and partly because we're a diverse community. We were one of the first communities in the state to implement body-worn cameras. We have implemented blue light emergency poles, which we've put in a number of our parks, including Hatch Park and Hatchfield, I should say, and Carwin Park, and Jackie Robinson is, in fact, we're going to put that one up soon. We have just promoted, brought back Chief Shaw primarily because he understood when he talked to me about the need to move our police department forward instead of continuing to do what we've been doing before. And with that, we've introduced more CIC training for our officers. We have now implemented a mental health response team. We are the first in the state to do that, so that when we do not believe that there is going to be a violent situation and when there is some concern about mental health, we actually go with the mental health side, and the police stay away so that they don't exacerbate the situation. That's what we're doing within the police ranks. And as I mentioned before, we promoted 2 new assistant chiefs, including Silas Redd, who brings a wealth of experience. And community policing is more than you get out of your car and you walk around and then you get back in your car and you drive away. And that's one of the things that Chief Shaw and I have had a discussion about, and how Silas Redd in particular is in charge of that. And it's about engaging with people that are standing around or whatever it is that they are doing. And the police officers, that's an uncomfortable role, but that's the direction we're going. And last but not least, with the appointment of Rodney Bass to the Police Commission, I have given the Police Commission more authority to act over disciplinary issues that ever existed before in the city of Stamford. We have got to keep this community safe. That is the first priority. And right now, post-pandemic, major cities across the country, and including Connecticut, are having a significant rise in crime. We're having a little bit of an increase, but we're fighting it back.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. State Representative Simmons, same question. What is your vision to make sure that Stamford remains the safest city in New England, and your perspective on community policing or the relationship with police and the fire department?
As mayor, my #1 job is to keep the people of Stamford safe and to keep our city safe from a range of threats. And this is something I learned firsthand at the Department of Homeland Security. Our motto was that Homeland Security starts with hometown security. And I would work really hard to bolster support from our federal and state government for our state and to leverage those relationships. At Homeland Security, we worked closely with state and local law enforcement across the country to share intelligence on threats ranging from terror threats to cyber threats. And I would bolster those efforts in Stamford. Then second, using my state legislative experience, I was served on the Public Safety Committee and was a champion for gun safety legislation to get illegal guns off our street and to strengthen our gun safety laws in Connecticut. I've also helped fight for legislation to support Stanford police, as well as to hold our police accountable. I voted for the police accountability bill, which included things like requiring body cameras and banning chokeholds and making sure that we're improving community policing and police-community relationships. And then thirdly, I think it's important to focus on the data and what's happening in communities. Right now, we're seeing an uptick in gun violence in our community, and I would work hard to reduce gun violence by getting illegal guns off our street, working to provide more at-risk programs for at-risk students, also working to make sure that we're collaborating with other towns and launching task force with our police chief and working with other towns to combat the issue of rising car thefts. We know that's an issue that is penetrating our community as well. And then finally, thinking about safety, we have to think about recent storms and people facing power outages and flooding. One of the biggest threats to our public safety is climate change. And so as we think about rebuilding our infrastructure, we need to focus on rebuilding it in a more resilient way so that we can mitigate the threat of climate change to our city. So things like looking at rising sea levels, building seawalls, making sure we're modernizing our grid and exploring things like burying electric wires and holding Eversource accountable for power outages.
Thank you,
so that residents are safe.
Simmons. As we move on, we encourage you, if you have any questions, to put your questions in the chat so that we may ask them. Reverend Dr. Robert Jackson will now come with question 12.
This is our last question that the moderators will have before, again, we entertain those questions via the social media platform. beginning with State Representative Caroline Simmons, pose this question to you. Stanford Public Schools recently passed an equity policy with the diversity in our district. How do you think this may affect the outcome for all students, Black and brown students in particular?
I think this is a critical policy that we just passed, and I applaud the Board of Ed for passing this policy. We know that racial inequities are rampant in our schools, and as mayor, I would use my seat to do everything I can to reduce racial inequities in our education system, because education is tied to so many other outcomes, whether it's employment outcomes, housing outcomes. And so right now we're facing a crisis. 43% of our first graders are below the benchmark for literacy. 25% of our students are struggling from mental health issues and just experienced trauma amidst this pandemic and need more support. And 40% of our freshmen are not on track to graduate from high school. And so we need to do everything we can to address those crises by launching evidence-based interventions to make sure that students aren't falling behind and making sure that we're giving them a fair shot. And it also starts even before students get into kindergarten. Right now, there's over 500 students that lack access to pre-K, and that means that they're going to be starting kindergarten behind. So as mayor, I want to launch a universal pre-K program, which we know is a key policy measure that we can take to reduce racial inequity in our school system. But as mayor, I support the racial equity policy that was passed, and I would do everything I could as mayor to advance racial equity in our school system to reduce educational injustices.
Thank you. Mayor Martin, question to you. Stanford Public Schools recently passed an equity policy. With the diversity in our district, how do you think this may affect the outcome for all students, Black and brown students in particular?
If we are able to implement successfully, which is something that I believe that we must do, then I think it will improve for everyone, for both, regardless of what your color of your skin or the color of your hair, the color of anything. If you have a better understanding about how different communities come together in our very diverse school system, I think that is the benefit of everybody, and I support it fully. The challenge is this. As you have seen nationwide and statewide in some of the emails that I see every day, there is the confusion about the extreme right, and the extreme left fighting out their ideological warfare and leaving out, let's get some fact-based stuff to educate our children about what's going on, and so they have a deeper understanding. And that fight between the extreme right or the extreme left, and to me it's more about what's coming out. And if you mentioned before, I think Reverend Ford had the question about some of the challenges that are going on within the school board. This issue is one of those issues that adds to that potential divisiveness. And I don't think that this is something where you can do a compromise. You have to stay true to your principles. But on the other hand, let's be careful that we're just not throwing shade at one another to create a school board that doesn't function very well and then doesn't vote for the programs we need. And we've seen that recently. Programs that Domus offered, where the school board couldn't come to an agreement, and there was substantial effort, including myself, to make certain that they got the votes necessary for those programs to help the students in need. Recently, the program that was offered by SPEF to the algebra people in high school, a program once again that had proven that it was successful. It's not as successful as you want it to be. We want to analyze it, et cetera. And once again, the school board pulled back from that, but fortunately we got that passed.
Thank you,
I'm going to continue to
Mr.
work
Mayor.
to make certain that communities in need within our schools get the resources
Thank
they
you.
need.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Mayor. Denise Lyles asks, what will you, and this question is for Mayor Martin, and then we'll pose it to State Representative Simmons. Denise Lyles asks, what will you do for the libraries in Stamford? Mayor Martin.
So first of all, I mentioned the Yearwood Center. When I took office, the library was cutting back, the Museum and Nature Center was cutting back, the Arboretum was on the brink of losing bankruptcy. It wasn't just the Yearwood Center. The Yearwood Center was, in fact, the most extreme. And I have consistently given additional funding support to those organizations which have brought them back, increased their hours, and particularly the library, which provides lots of services to a broad array of students, And you go into, pre-pandemic, you go into the main library and you would see the students busy studying, whether it was at TOR or the main library. And right now, I really am reluctant to go into details, but we are looking for a state grant to substantially provide a new service within our library. We're talking millions of dollars. I have provided increases in funding that's above the rate of inflation, so they actually recovered from the cutbacks that were before, and I will continue to do that. The library has been instrumental in helping this community move forward. It is managed well, and the dollars that we give them, I believe, give us a good return on investment as a community overall, and as the people who need the services that the library provides better than anyone else after school hours.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. State Representative Simmons, same question. What will you do for the libraries in Stamford?
Libraries are a treasured part of our community. Not only do they provide a social gathering space and a sense of connectedness, but they also provide the gift of reading to children, and they also provide all kinds of services like job training programs, computer programs, and entrepreneurial opportunities. As state representative, I've worked hard with the city and the state delegation to secure more funding for our libraries, and worked on securing a CT Next grant to support the South End Library branch. And as mayor, I would work to not only continue to secure more resources for our existing libraries and expand services like offering more job training programs and entrepreneurial spaces and opportunities, but I would also work to create new libraries. My vision is to create a new library on the west side, and I want to make sure that every resident in our city has access to a quality library in their neighborhood.
Thank you very much. State Representative Carolyn Simmons. So one of the issues that Nicole Beckham has raised is the lack of signals at some of the crosswalks. How would you improve that? What would you do? And in terms of lighting in Jackie Robinson Park?
Yes, so the signals issue is a common complaint I get from residents and constituents, and this is something that has to be fixed. We have to make sure that our crosswalks are safe, and as state representative, I worked with the delegation hard to secure grants and state funding to protect pedestrian safety, but also to improve our crosswalks and signals, and there's also federal funding for this as well that we could seek out. So first, I would start by working with our transportation director and our engineering department, taking a look at every crosswalk in our city, finding the ones where there isn't sufficient lighting or isn't sufficient signals for pedestrians, and making sure that we're fixing those crosswalks that are the most dangerous first. And second, I would seek out additional funding and resources to enhance the lighting and signals at all of our crosswalks. This is one of the shortcomings of our city, is that it is not connected and walkable, and my goal is to create a dedicated sidewalk fund and to build more sidewalks to better connect our city so that people have the opportunity to walk across our beautiful city, and so that neighborhoods are more connected and safe for residents. And with respect to lighting at Jackie Robinson Park, this is another huge opportunity we have as a city to seek out state grants, to seek out philanthropic funding, to make sure that that park has all the resources that other parks have. I hear a lot of complaints from residents that some parks don't get as much attention as other parks in our city, and we need to make sure all of our residents have access to a quality, safe park. And we know that lighting is a critical part of safety, of quality of life at a park, and I would work hard to secure state bonding dollars to be able to get those resources for Jackie Robinson Park.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Representative Simmons. Same question, Mayor Martin. The lack of signals, how will you address that, and what will you do with the lighting in Jackie Robinson Park?
So a few years ago, we had a fatality on not Lower Summer Street, but just above Lower Summer Street near the Dairy Queen. And it was a year later that we had another severe accident where a pedestrian was hit again. And before I became mayor, there was no significant intersection improvements anywhere in the city for a decade. There had been a project on Hope Street that was not going well, or had not been implemented well. And there was a project for Urban Transitway 2 that was way over budget with no idea when it was going to get completed. We've changed that. And in particular, we changed the lighting, the timing for signals on Summer Street, and we were the first in the state to do that. We got DOT to agree as a pilot project, and subsequently we put in bump outs so that the pedestrians could get across the street. And right at Dairy Queen, there you can see the bump outs that have now been implemented, and I in fact watched just recently someone in a wheelchair who could now get across Summer Street, whereas before they would not have been able to without us basically slowing down traffic to a point that we get complaints on the other side. We've been making changes in how we do roads, how we pave them, how we change all of that, and as a result, our pedestrian fatalities in Stamford are actually going down, whereas in the rest of the country, fatalities are going up. We have tackled this problem. We've made major intersection improvements at, for instance, West Avenue and West Main on the west side, and at the turn in Stillwater at Boxer Square, which was not just something to improve traffic flow and improve safety, but also to, in fact, make that more of a community space, and it was a resounding success. So we are continuing to do that. It was a new change. I had to reorganize the engineering department. I had to get new resources for a new director of traffic and parking, a number of management changes that have resulted in saving people's lives. And to Jackie
Thank you, Mayor
Robinson,
Martin.
we're about ready to put up a blue light pole in Jackie Robinson. I'm sorry I didn't have more time to answer that.
Dr. Jackson?
As we look to conclude our time together, I want to thank both of you, Representative Caroline Simmons and also Mayor Martin, for your comments. We will give you now the next few moments. I believe our agenda states 5 minutes as for the closing statement. And so we will begin with Mayor Martin, and you will give your closing statements, and then State Representative Caroline Simmons will give your closing statements. Mayor Martin.
Stanford is recognized as the star of the state. We're the most successful, large, diverse community in New England. We are making progress where almost no other large cities in the state have made much progress at all. I started with so many issues it would take me 20 minutes just to go through the list of things that had gone that were not being taken care of. They were being answered with political answers and political promises rather than getting to the crux of how do we fix these problems and move forward. And the gamut runs from, as we've discussed, the roads, the schools, diversity, our finances. And it is a challenge. It's a challenge when the Board of Finance or the Board of Representatives comes along and says, no, you can't have that position. No, you can't have that money for that budget. Or the funding that was promised from the state for the enterprise zone, they renege on that funding. There are challenges that happen each and every day. And as we sit here, we are continuing to address those challenges. For instance, we are announcing for the first time that we're going to have audible signals on our pedestrian cross. And we're starting that program now. And we're behind. We're behind, but we're catching up. We're getting it done. And that's where I come in. I've got the management experience. I spent all those years in the Board of Representatives to understand how our capital process works, how our operating process works, how the boards typically behave, many of the members that I know well, and how to get things through, given the fact that we've got 10 different unions. We have to abide by MIRA. We have a host of other regulations that we have to abide by. And I don't want to see those as excuses. I want to put those up as those are part of the challenge. And so if you've listened here to me tonight, I've talked about what we have done in the face of many, many challenges. And we're not there yet. If we were where I wanted to be, then maybe I wouldn't be running. But I believe that we still have more to do to get to the place that we should get to, which, as I said before, that shining example of a diverse city that actually works, that recognizes diversity and makes its diversity work for it, that has good roads, that has better parks, and even the best of education. But we're going to need help. We always do. I need the assistance of others. And quite frankly, for as much success as I had, I have to give a great deal of credit to all the people that helped me achieve what we have achieved by changing the way we look at capital projects so that it's not just satisfying whatever political interest it is, but what actually gives us the best benefit, what gives us the best bang for the buck. How how do we make certain that we get our AAA rating so that we can reduce our bonding costs so that we can do even more? How much money can I actually put in reserve so that we can continue to fund improvements in the schools that until unless and until the state starts funding us the way the other major cities are, we're going to be struggling for that. Typically, the large cities get 80 to 90%. In the last 124 million, we've gotten 5%. And the only major success is that when we actually convinced DAS using their regulations to get us the funding for Strawberry Hill, which has been a big success. We will continue to do the things that continue to make our city the best city in the state, the best city in New England, and quite frankly, the best city in this country. I've got one more term that I'm committed to work on that problem. We've made enormous strides. We've made more progress in more areas than anyone else, and we can continue to do that. And I'm asking for the privilege and for the honor of continuing to serve this community, not for my political ambitions or for anything else, but simply because I love this community, where my children grew up, where they went to school, where I have devoted so much of my life as a volunteer to help this community thrive, and now as mayor, continue to do that service. I think we are a wonderful community. I love it here. And as difficult and as frustrating as it can be, and I can guarantee you it's difficult and frustrating almost every day, I love what we're doing because we're making progress, whereas no other community is. And the state overall is struggling to get out of its debts and deal with the challenges that it has from its legacies. So I thank you very much to the concerned clergy. I thank you, Reverend Ford. Thank you, Reverend Jackson, for your service here tonight. And I wish that everyone will come out to vote. I want them to vote for me, of course, but I want them to come out to vote this coming Tuesday in the Democratic primary. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mayor Martin. And State Representative Caroline Simmons, you have the time now to share.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Ford, and the Stanford Concerned Clergy for hosting us tonight. I also want to thank Mayor Martin for his service, and I want to just say too that it's remarkable that we live in a country that has free and fair elections where anyone can run for office and work to improve our community. And so I'm honored to be running in this race. My husband's family on his father's side fled communist Cuba in the 1960s, a country where they were persecuted for speaking out or challenging the regime, where there were firing squads. And they came to what his grandfather called the greatest country on earth to build opportunity for their kids and their family. And so I'm so proud, and I think we can't take for granted how lucky we are to live in this democratic system. And so I want to thank everyone for being engaged in this election, for making your voice heard, and for voting in this election, no matter who you vote for. I am so blessed to have had the opportunity to run as mayor and to get to be your next mayor, hopefully, and I hope I can earn your vote on September 14th. It's been an honor to serve our community as state representative for the past 7 years, and before that to serve our country in Washington at Homeland Security. And I have the experience, the energy, and the passion and the vision needed to move our city forward. My husband and I are so blessed to be raising our 2 sons here in Stamford. We love this city, and I feel a sense of urgency to make our city a brighter place for all of our children. And while we've made so much progress, there's so much we can be doing better, and too many people are struggling right now, struggling to afford to live here, struggling to find work, struggling to be able to make ends meet, and to afford their rent, and to afford food, and to afford housing, and all the things to be able to have a good quality of life. And so as mayor, I want to build a more inclusive, affordable, equitable city where all residents have the opportunity to thrive and pursue their dreams. As mayor, I'll focus on fixing our infrastructure, on improving education and investing in our students and teachers, on advancing economic prosperity so everyone has access to a good paying job and opportunity for social and economic mobility. I'll focus on making our city more affordable so people aren't getting priced out and people can afford to live in this wonderful city. And finally, I'll work to make our government more responsive and accountable to our residents, to deliver better services to our residents. One of my favorite things about this city is our incredibly diverse population. We have people that speak over 65 different languages who come from all over the world. What an incredibly enriching place to live, and I'm so proud to have had the opportunity to represent this city and to be running to be your mayor. and I vow to be your voice, to work tirelessly on behalf of you and your family to make our city work better for you. And I hope I could earn your vote on September 14th. And thank you for the honor of participating in this forum tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Mayor Martin and State Representative Carolyn Simmons. We want to thank you, our viewing audience, as well, for tuning in and for your questions. Usually, the candidates would have an opportunity to come around and speak, but because of COVID has put us in a different place. So we've tried to use every means necessary to make sure that our citizens here in Stamford can be informed voters coming September 14th. We had some technical difficulties with videos for the West Side Board of Representatives. And so those videos will be posted to the website, to the Facebook and YouTube pages tomorrow around noon. You can go back and hear what our candidates for the West Side, their platform as well. Thank you again for your time. I pray that this has been informative, and that you will go out on September 14th, Tuesday, September 14th, and vote. Voting times are from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And you can go to the Stanford website to find your voting location. Have a good night.